Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. I am pleased to be joined by Jane Clark, who will be presenting on what do employers really want from MBA talent. So in a moment I'm going to pass over to Jane, but before I do I'd just like to let you know that this session will feature some poll questions and a Q&A section at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please send these throughout the webinar and hopefully we get a chance to answer them all at the end. If we do not have time to answer any of the questions, don't worry, Jane has kindly agreed to reach out to you following the webinar with her answers. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Jane, who'll be able to start the session.
That's great, Paul. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I hope that you're all well today. My name, as you can see, is Jane Clark. And at the moment, I'm working for AMS, Alexander Mann Solutions. I head up the product development there. And I am here to talk to you. I suppose it's because before I joined AMS, over for the past kind of 20 years, I've actually been working in the financial services space for the likes of Credit Suisse, for Merrill Lynch, and latterly Barclays. And actually, I've had the most, I think, amazing career to date so far. And most of my role is actually been doing things like this. It's actually attracting, recruiting, selecting, developing and retaining top graduate talent globally. So a really big job. I have travelled around the world with my career. I have met lots of people like yourself in company presentations and obviously throughout some of the assessment and selection processes that have been run before. And I'm just really hoping that I might be able to help with the experience that I've had before on the other side of the fence, to talk to you a little bit today about what I think that employers really want from MBA talent. Also, like yourselves, I'm studying at the moment as well. So I have just today submitted my thesis in preparation for my Viva. So I'm studying for a DBA, a Doctor in Business Administration at the University of Southampton. So we are all students together here on this call. For me personally, I just felt as if I had another career left in me. And that's why I switched really from in-house roles and working for global organizations to consulting to innovation, and something that I was able to wrap really around my studies as well. So I'm looking at HRM and OB. That's really where my thesis sits. And what my question was is looking at the value of graduate development programs from a talent management perspective and through a psychological contract lens in the future world of work. So let's hope that some way or another that I may be able to help graduate programs. Who knows where all these things go. So without further ado, let's have a look at the agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. So there were three things that I was told that you wanted to know a little bit more about today, and hoping I'm going to be able to cover that for you. So the first one is really the state of the nation, organisations today, where we're at, and the types of questions that we'll be looking at here is really, which is on all of our minds at the moment, is how the pandemic has really impacted behaviours in the workplace, and also more importantly, who's hiring, what organisations and sectors do we think are the most sort of interesting to target at the moment. Also looking at the skills conversation as well, my favourite, not. All these polls and all these skills that employers are saying that are lacking and what are needed today. So we want to delve a little bit more into what do we think employers are really expecting from MBA talent in terms of those softer skills and also the more transferable skills as well. And also more importantly, the tech skills. So, you know, what do we sort of really need to know? And finally, the future of work as well. So really thinking about future trends in the workplace. You know, how do we stay relevant in this fast-paced world as well where we live, and just really some kind of final advice to kind of wrap everything up. What I've done in this session is you would be so bored if it was just me talking for a whole hour. And so what I have done is engaged with two of my network, which I'll be introducing in a minute, and they'll be introducing themselves, which I have recorded some interviews for submission for this presentation today. So you'll be meeting Caroline Brent, who is a director at Humdex that has got an amazing track record and career. and also Bob Atwell, who is a former MBA. He's also studying, like myself, for his doctorate. He's at the moment working for Skyscanner. So I've kind of broken today's session up into 3 main sections, with sound bites from Caroline and from Bob, and obviously from me just kind of summarising the section as well. And there's going to be a few polls, as Paul said today, so hopefully I'm going to try and keep everybody engaged as much as possible throughout the session. So going on to topic 1 now, the world of work today, and our first poll. So what I want to know from you all, and I'm hoping that you can all see this, is due to the impact of the global pandemic, my career aspirations and direction. And what I want to know is, have your career aspirations and directions significantly changed, slightly changed, or haven't changed at all due to the impact of the global pandemic?
Excellent. So we've got the poll open for everyone. Just to cover what Jane's just mentioned, we will have Q&A section at the end. So keep your questions coming in, and hopefully get a chance to answer them all. So we'll just give it a few more moments for everyone to answer the first poll. Okay, so the results are in. So we've got 33% say significant change, 43% say slightly changed, and 25% say not changed at all.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Thank you very much. And I'm hoping that throughout the session today that we might be able to unpack that, and really the significant change when we start to talk about where, you know, the direction and where we think roles and the careers are going to be, whether perhaps the people have not changed at all might want to start to think about they might want to slightly change. So as I mentioned before, here are my 2 people in the network. And before we joined, I was talking to Paul, and you know, the other offer, I suppose, as well, is that you know, we are here to help as well. So Caroline, Bob, and myself, you know, we are all really happy to kind of share any knowledge that we have. You know, we're very happy if you want to link us in as well, to you know, to say hi to us on LinkedIn. I know that Caroline and Bob, you know, are, like myself, are really here, you know, to kind of help us as much as what we can. So I'm going to now switch on the audio, and you can hear a little bit more from Caroline and Bob. They'll be introducing themselves first, and I posed a couple of questions to them around the state of the nation and the world of work today. And we're covering things like the types of you know, the types of behaviours and change that the pandemic has brought around in the workplace, and how we think that that's going to be impacting our working lives moving forward. So let me switch on the audio.
Now, Caroline, thank you so much for being part of this panel with us today. Very firstly, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so thank you very much for asking me. I'm delighted to be here. I spent most of my career working in human resources in large corporate businesses, but I have done other roles in manufacturing management. I've worked with a trade union, but mostly I've spent my time working at those strategic levels in large corporate businesses, either in the UK or abroad. So I've lived and worked abroad and so on. So that's basically my my work background, if you like.
Yeah, hi Jane. My name's Bob, as you know, Bob Atwell. I am currently working at Skyscanner, where I look after all of our racial diversity globally. And if you don't know Skyscanner, we're your website for all your travel needs, so flights, hotels, car rental. We're a comparison website.
I want to now turn to, I call it the state of the nation, but really sort of organisations today. And how have you seen the pandemic change behaviours in the workplace?
I think there's a number of things to look at. First of all, what are those key roles that are really respected? If you think about health workers and key workers, how much that has come to the fore when maybe those weren't the roles that were so respected historically, how critically important they are for all of us and our survival. Secondly, things about the culture and the trust, command and control structures in businesses. So, for example, people are now working in the main at a distance in lots of businesses. That means there has to be an element of trust in how people work. And that old idea about, you know, who's in the office, when you get there, when you leave, a presenteeism thing, I hope we see the back of that. So that's been a really good impact. Much less business travel. People have discovered, I mean, how important really is all this travel, the environmental damage it does when we use business travel. Things about being tech savvy, it's really brought forward the need to understand how to use technology, first of all, to be efficient and effective, and secondly, from an environmental point of view, that's been really important. Communication style. Communicating when you're at a distance is super different from when you can walk down the corridor and say, well, you can have your corridor conversations, or you can do all those things that you do in the general run of traditional working life. So that's really changed. And then I think fundamentally, when and how people work. So there's been a huge amount more flexibility about how you get work done. And to me, this is like music to my ears. I've argued for many years that people should be judged on outputs rather than inputs. And this has absolutely driven that agenda. When you can see what people are doing and how they produce that, is much more important than the way they do it. So I think there's some really good outputs, even though it's been a bad circumstance for all of us to be part of that.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And you know, you've come up with some amazing sort of salient points there. I think what I'm reading at the moment is this big thing about what's going to happen. Are we going to go back to the office? Are we all going to be staying at home? Is there going to be a kind of like a hybrid? I mean, you've talked really greatly about all of the sorts of changes that you have seen. But Caroline, where are you in that camp? What do you think is going to happen if you looked in your crystal ball? Are we all staying at home wearing our slippers? Are we all going to go back in the office, or do you think it's going to be a little bit of a hybrid?
Well, I think there's two things on that. One is, let's see what you can make happen. How would you like it to be? So don't believe you can't influence it. I would hope, so my hope is it makes us a much more inclusive society, because we've found now we can work in very different ways. That's quite exciting, because those people that for many reasons might not have been able to participate in the way they would have liked to, maybe there's an opportunity to do that. So that means your talent pool is so much larger. Your ability to include people is so much better. So first of all, don't believe that you can't influence it. And secondly, I think that businesses will have lots of opportunities to think about the way that they operate and pick the best of those experiences from the traditional and the way that we've been working recently. And I think there's opportunity, but don't believe you can't influence it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I've said this to you before, Jane, but obviously for the context of this, I think 2020 has been a year that you really do need to stop and reflect and think about, you know, what your role is really, and what your ambition is and what you want to achieve. I think that's the key. For me, the behaviours is really that it's accelerated our ability to work remotely and not be seen as, oh, that's just something some people do one day a week, work from home, and actually everyone else has to be in the office, because if you're not in the office, you're not productive. So I think the behaviour is a big one, is around an attitude shift around actually you can still be productive working from home. There are some organisations that won't buy into that, and you've just got to look in the UK press this week about some banks that have been sort of called out for kind of the working conditions that they put their staff under. But I think overall the behaviour will really be about, you know, how do you get the balance in life? How do you kind of enable people to be successful, whether they work in an office or work remotely, and what does that hybrid model look like? And also the fact that, you know, people are probably going to be a bit more purpose driven around what they're giving their time and energy to. So I think that would be what I think the pandemic's changed.
Now, Caroline, thank you so much for being.
I then asked Caroline, sort of the $1 million question of who she felt was hiring and what organisations and sectors she felt would be the most interesting to target right now.
So let's start with the impact of the pandemic on various parts of the economy. So we can all see really clearly anything to do with people facing catering, hospitality, travel. These industries have been really hard hit. will they bounce back? Maybe, but maybe not in the same way. It might be difficult to target those because they already lose a lot of people. There'll be a lot of people in the market with experience. Even if you want to work there, it might be tripping. What are those industries who have benefited, if you like, or been more successful? So healthcare, teaching, those types of industries. So if you're going to target somewhere, catering and those people-facing industries may be less positive than anything to do with how you get things done online. So the technology that supports online, the ability to move things online, the ability to work online, those things I think of, but any industry who wants to have that as part of what they do. So we're talking healthcare, teaching, online businesses, but not so much those people-facing things. And I think it remains to be seen what the bounce back will look like, because we might find, I mean, if you take the UK as an example, let's just imagine that. What's going to happen to people's vacation thinking and plans, especially over the next 3 to 5 years? Will it be much more home-based, even if there is the opportunity to travel? What that might mean more opportunities here. So I think it really depends on how people react as they come out of the pandemic. But from a big picture point of view, definitely those hospitality-based industries are hardest hit. There will be lots of people available. Those industries that are related to healthcare, I think, will be a good place to think about and target. So let's start with.
So I don't know whether any of that was a surprise to anybody, whether some of you have already seen some of this already. I think it's really interesting about the hybrid world. It just kind of felt over the last few weeks that when one organisation announces globally that they're all going to go back to the office, the next day another organisation will go in and say, well, actually, we're not going to do that because of X, Y, Z. We're going to be doing this. And so, you know, at the moment, I think that you're seeing, you know, different camps coming up with different views of what people are thinking are going to be happening for the future. I think it's really interesting. I think if you ask me where I think it's going to go, I think I'm sat on the fence, and I think probably, you know, 2 to 3 days in the office, 2 to 3 days work at home, and it may be. We all know what our human behaviours are like, and when you're forced to do something, you absolutely want to do the opposite. And it could be that whilst everybody rushes back when we are able to the office, that people see that actually it may not be all cracked up, that we thought that it would, and perhaps we haven't missed as many of those annoying people or annoying things that happen in office environments, and we'll all be running back home and putting our slippers back on again. But I think that, you know, there are different camps at the moment, and I think it will be up to our behaviours to kind of really decide really where that lands. In terms of the emerging industry trends, so for this presentation, I had a look for you at the fastest growing industries. And again, you know, being in graduate recruitment for all the years that I've been in, working for, you know, the top investment banks, you know, that's obviously one view. And it's really interesting to see the fast growing industries, which I'm not quite sure whether any of you have picked this choice, but the very, very top one is safety equipment and supplies. I'm sure that doesn't surprise anybody. The second one is online food delivery. Let's forget Deliveroo out of this for now, but that's the second one. And the third one is bicycles, so bicycle retailing. And the jobs, I think Caroline was absolutely spot on with what she was saying. We're absolutely seeing an interest and resurgence in healthcare. I think actually in the NHS itself as well. So some of those public sector roles that may not have have been so sexy in the past, I think will probably be, you know, careers of the future for people. And also thinking about the manufacturing as well. So when we sort of think about the pandemic and what's happened in terms of digitalization and technology, thinking about those supply chain transformations that have happened, you know, in very, very kind of short spaces, I think that will be definitely something that we're going to see. And finally, for me, it's about sustainability and the triple bottom line. I'm sure, hopefully, most of you know what I'm talking about here. It's definitely something that I've put in my thesis as well, because it's so important to organisations now, and they've been measured on this. Some people look at it as in terms of the 3 Ps, so people, planet, and prosperity. If you've got a little bit of time and you haven't seen it yet, probably looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is a really, really good one to have a look at. And you know, you see sort of this kind of played out in organisational strategy around social, environmental, and economic goals. So, you know, any line of category of career that you're going to be going into, once you finish studying for your MBA, I doubt there'll be anybody on this call and on this webinar that somehow or other in their career won't be influenced by some type of sustainability measure. Let's move on to topic 2 and the skills conversations. So a poll now. I want to go back out, and actually there is a right and a wrong answer here, so no pressure, everybody. What I want to know is what are the most important skills for 2021 to be successful in the world of work?
Excellent. So we've got the second poll live for everyone. So we'll just give it a few more moments for everyone to answer, and then I'll be able to give the results. So just to remind everyone, keep your questions coming in. We'll put these forward to Jane at the end, and hopefully we'll get to answer all of them. So the results are in for the poll. So we have 17% say technology skills and digital fluency, 67% say resilience and adaptability, and 17% say emotional intelligence.
No, I'm not surprised. So B wins it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm not quite sure if you were all quickly going on your phones to Google to try and find the answer, but I don't think you did. I think you knew this already. And obviously, if you want to learn anything more about that, this has come out of the LinkedIn Learning and Development. They've got a new report that's come out for 2021 that I actually quite like. It goes a lot into Generation Z, which obviously is a fascinating subject for me, but it really talks about the future and where we're going. And in terms of resilience, we are really seeing much more around mental health resilience as well. And if you ask me of an attribute or a competency of the future for when you go for job interviews, I bet you mental health resilience is going to be starring in there somewhere. So definitely watch out for that. Let's move a little bit more now into the skills conversations. And this is the expectations from employers of what Caroline and Bob and myself think about what employers are expecting from you.
The first kind of question, and I know that in the HR roles that you have held in these really big organisations, you would have come across this type of conversation. What do you think employers are expecting from an MBA graduate in terms of sort of the softer transferable skills?
I think a couple of things. If you're an employer that's sponsoring MBA graduates, the first thing we'd like is that you came back to us when you've done your MBA. All right? Because sometimes employers can be put off if they lose their wonderful people that they sponsor. So that's just an anecdote, if you like. But remembering, if you like, the people that sponsored you to do that, at least having some responsibility to taking those qualifications forward in the organisation that you left in and now going to rejoin. When it comes down to actual skills, I'm a great believer in transversal or transferable skills, we call being those key skills for success. So things like communication abilities, and by that I really mean communication, not information, two-way communication, multifaceted ways of communication with different, is it online, is it in person, how to manage people at a distance, those skills in this new world, how to create teams at a distance, team working, project management, how to manage disparate groups of people through projects are really important. Leadership style, is servant leadership going to be something that's going to become much more to the fore now rather than command and control type of leadership? I would hope that those things that allow people to express themselves and to progress become more predominant. And there's things like managing conflict and handling objections. How do you interpret how people are feeling or working or behaving when you're working at a distance from somebody? Those skills I think will be important. Your own work ethic. How do you work, and what does that say to other people about you? Being open to ideas and innovative new ways of doing things, thinking of ways of creating new opportunities. So I think innovation, translating ideas into action. One of the biggest difficulties the company have is with people who are great at thinking of strategy. We've got people who are fantastic at doing things. You really need these translators that help you say, with this strategy, what needs to happen? How is it going to really work? And then I think finally, and I think this is going to become a really, really important thing we all have to think about, living with ambiguity. You're going to have to live every day with those things that weren't quite how you imagined or look different to how you thought they might be. accepting that as part of your world, I think is going to be important to your own mental health and also important to your own abilities to succeed.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. I think it's you know, the MBA skills are so varied in the fact of what you acquire, but I think in my experience, and this is just my personal opinion, people who have missed the opportunity of the MBA is they've gone there thinking that there's going to be this magic formula that they're going to get given and that's going to be forever making them really impactful. And what they've failed to realise is that the power of the MBA is actually the people you study with and the different organisations and sectors that they represent. And so when you're discussing, you know, whether it's financial resources or lean supply operations or marketing principles, whatever it might be, actually it's about understanding, you know, the context of the organisation and the industry you work in, but also learning from your peers or the programme to understand, okay, what are their challenges, what are their solutions? And I think those MBA skills are absolutely critical, and then the articulation of those skills that you understand not only your own sector, but you understand the context challenge in other sectors and how you can bring that together to either move your one forward or learn from another to move yours forward or to mitigate some of those challenges that may arise. And I think those skills around being able to articulate, being able to communicate, being able to influence are really, really important. Where people get stuck is they start to throw theoretical models, 2x2 matrices at people, and it just goes over their heads. So the model's there, but the articulation of why that model is important and how it's going to solve a problem is not what's really displayed. So I think that softer side of being able to articulate and communicate and influence is going to be absolutely critical.
Then we hear a lot at the moment about these tech skills, and like there are hundreds of them as well. What, you know, should we all be coders now? And you know, in this kind of era that we're all in, what do you think is going to be the minimum requirement in terms of the tech know-how when we join organisations?
I think tech know-how has become much more mainstream than it was pre-COVID, because everybody has been forced, and I'm talking baby boomers now, which I probably count myself as part of, have been forced to learn how to do things in a way that you never have done before. Actually, I think that's a good thing, because it dispels some of the myth around technology, how difficult it is to use, and also the value that it brings. I think people entering the job market today come automatically with the skills to be successful. But actually, I think the minimum you have is what you have. You already have that engine. It's where you struggle is trying to persuade those who are maybe more mature in the business world of the value of using those to the full. So I would put the question the other way around. I don't think there's a minimum test score. I think people come automatically with that in most cases. It's about making sure they get used effectively. And we've just been forced into a situation that's made us all do different. I think that's a good thing.
You know, do we all need to be techies and have coding skills? I don't think so, actually. I think we need to have an appreciation of how technology works and what technology can do for us. So, for example, you know, in my world, in terms of, you know, being a sort of HR people sort of department, I think it's what can coding do from script to kind of make our life more effective, more efficient, so that the human capital, i.e. the brain power that we've got, actually we can apply in a different way that has more meaning, more impact. So I think when people say having, you know, are we all going to need to be coders? No, but we do need to know how to code certain things so that actually we can be freed up to do the real meaningful stuff. And I think the industries for me that are going to kind of win are combining technology and that human capital in that way. And if you think about that, it can be done across all sectors. So, you know, I think health is going to be a really interesting area, because I think, you know, if there's one thing that everyone has appreciated, I suspect, and try not to be political, but except the UK government, of course, is that we've all acknowledged and recognised the role the health system has played on this pandemic. And they deserve all sorts of accolades, really. But what they do need is resources and more people in there and technology to kind of figure out, you know, how do we work more effectively? Because I'm afraid to say there will be another pandemic. There's no doubt about that. It's really about what lessons we learned from it and how can we mitigate that so we don't have the sort of prolonged lockdown scenario or the third wave scenario that we've potentially seen in Europe come across. So I think health is going to be a really interesting one because we're living longer and it needs investment. I think purpose is going to be really, really important. So, you know, the UN Sustainable Goals, for example, I think are really going to come to life in a way that people are thinking, okay, what can I do to try and support that in terms of making this world a better place? And so with that, in terms of the UN Sustainable Goals, what it gives you is a framework. So if your level of expertise is engineering, or your level of expertise is, you know, manufacturing, or your expertise is human capital or accounting or technology, actually, how can you apply your knowledge experience to one of those goals to advance, you know, society? And I think that's going to be really important. So I think the public service, the public sort of organisations, international organisations, are going to probably see a resurgence of people wanting to go in and apply their knowledge and experience.
Yeah, great, thank you. The first kind of
Okay, so summary and summing all of that up. I put here, I think my summary really is about employability. We hear this word such a lot, the bridging the gap between what we are taught at university to what the employers are wanting. And it just seems, and this was kind of part of my research actually and part of my thesis, and it does seem that this has just been an ongoing issue that has been rumbling for many, many, many years. And I think rather than coming together, it feels that it's being even more and more dispersed. For me, I think employability is upskilling and reskilling. It's all about making ourselves sustainable in the workplace. I was reading a report actually that said nowadays that I think a role will last for about 3 years before it starts to change. And I think back to my career and some of the roles that I've had. Do you know, I think that's absolutely right. And so, you know, those people that are going to be sitting on their seats in a role and not thinking that it's going to change and not do anything about that change, well, watch out, because change will happen for you, and you'll become very outdated very, very quickly. It's all about making sure that you're absolutely one step ahead. You know, there's so many disruptions that are happening, and when I kind of think back to it, you know, they can be sometimes geography. So all of a sudden, you know, you're looking after, you know, for example, I was looking after Asia and EMEA when I joined Barclays, and then Bob Diamond was there at the time and decided that we were going to become one Barclays rather than having sort of separate entities. And with that, you know, I was then looking after the corporate bank, and then I was looking after the retail bank, and then my job was sort of getting bigger and bigger, and then you become kind of global. So you've really kind of got to keep up with it, keep yourself upskilled, you know, keep yourself reskilled as well. Be curious about things and start to unlearn. I think that that's one of the things that, you know, we talk an awful lot about pace and change and all the things that we have to learn. There's the thing about unlearning some of the stuff, you know, that we have learned, because sometimes it's just obsolete and it just doesn't kind of work anymore. So I think that that's kind of one of the things I'd put out there. I think that the second thing is the skills in demand. I get a bit kind of quite worked up about all of this, and you know, we see all the laundry lists of what the top skill is, and you look on the World Economic Forum database or you know, wherever it may be, you know, and curiosity has jumped from number 10 to number 1, and you know, adaptability has gone to number 4, and the communications gap is getting wider by 1%. You know, what does, you know, the so what, I suppose, comes into that for me. What does all of that kind of really mean? And I think Bob kind of was talking about this when he was talking about context. So when you think about critical thinking in banking, for example, that's going to be really different to critical thinking in manufacturing and critical thinking in healthcare. And I think it's just being a bit more pragmatic about these labels and the competencies that kind of get wrapped around it. I think sometimes too much emphasis is put on it. You know, don't get me wrong, whenever we go for interviews, it'd be great to find the list of 5 or 6 things that you're being measured with, and I think that that's absolutely right. I think what my point is, though, is it's the context that really makes, I think, these skills very different when you look at it from industry to industry. And finally, around the tech skill debate as well. So, you know, where am I at with this? I think for me, so at the University of Southampton, they've actually set up and put funding into a coding group, and I think that's great. So every 6 to 8 weeks, a different programming language is offered. It's all free. You can go along. You can kind of do your thing, and I think that that's really great. One of the organisations that I studied actually as part of my thesis, a really good case study came up out of there, where they had a graduate on the graduate scheme that decided he wanted to kind of do some coding. He then was so hooked on it, he did a little bit in his spare time. And in actual fact, he wrote a program for hot desking, for a hot desking app for their organisation that they still use today. I mean, how cool is that? If you're really thinking about how are you going to be leaving a legacy behind in an organisation, that's probably a really good example of that. So, I think you can kind of take it wherever it goes. I think for me, it's having an elevator pitch. So when someone talks to you about Python, what is your elevator pitch around Python? What is it? How does it work? Where would you probably hear that being used? HTML. That's kind of probably for me how far I would go. I think I'm quite curious naturally anyway. But I think that in order to kind of stay relevant, I think that that's really, really important. I'm looking at time and conscious, and we're going now on to our last topic, which is the future of work. And the last question, so this was actually one of the questions that I'm being a bit selfish here, that I had in my own research. This is around, I don't know whether some of you have heard of this, but the boundaryless career, the protean career, who owns whose career nowadays? Do we own our career? Does the organisation own it? And also, what does career success look like to you? How are you measuring your success in terms of your career? So this is a kind of a personal question really out to you, to ask you, what does career success look like to you? Is it A, career advancement and hierarchy? Is it B, to make a positive impact and difference? Or C, just to be happy?
Okay, so we've got the final poll launched to everyone. We'll just give it a few more moments for everyone to answer that. Obviously, keep questions coming in for the Q&A section at the end, and obviously, if we aren't able to answer your question, that will get passed on to Jane, who will be in touch afterwards. So we're just going to wrap up the final poll, and everyone's answered. So we have 20% say career advancement and hierarchy. We have 58% say to make a positive impact and difference, and 22% say to be happy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. I find it absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to our last topic, which is around the future of work. So here I was, Caroline is actually part of a Future of Work Council. So what I was sort of asking Caroline and Bob to do is to kind of look into their crystal ball, to kind of think about what opportunities are there in the future of work. What should we really be expecting?
I now want to move on to the future of work. And I know this is a real sweet spot for you, Caroline. What I want to understand is, what future trends do you foresee playing out in the world of work, this future world of work?
So I've had a long think about this, and there's 2 or 3 things that I think are going to be very important. Whether it pans out like this, we shall have to see. But I think one of the things that has happened during COVID is that people have become much more attached to job security. So I think job security may well be a future driver. My worry about that is that employers who are able to offer job security don't then manage to get away with offering inferior terms and conditions because they have the job security to offer. So I think job security is going to be an interesting one to think about. There's also the role of the corporate head office and office space in general. What is going to happen to those large edifices that we've all been used to? What will we use them for? How will that work? What will city centres look like? All of those things I think are going to be critically important. What about those candidate-rich, highly impacted sectors? So if you're working for a cruise company, or if you're in the hospitality sector, what are candidates from those sectors who have suffered tremendous job losses? What's going to happen there? Will it flood the market? What will it mean for new students entering the market? What about things like entrepreneurship in small businesses? With those small businesses that have had their fingers very badly burned as a result of COVID, what happens opens those entrepreneurial skills and mindset, and that want to have your own responsibility for your own life. So I worry a little bit that we go back a little bit more to that corporate-driven model, offering the secure job for the future, and we lose maybe that entrepreneurial skill and spirit. So that would be a concern of mine. It's also about contracts of employment and getting work done. We can be very creative now about the sort of way of working we can offer people if we choose to do that. So for those who want to work in a different way, who might want to work for multiple employers, who might want to have a different relationship, it means people who are working in the people-facing functions in businesses. Yes, and as I said to you earlier on, and I do believe this, it opens a much, much greater talent pool, not only in terms of types of people, but the geographies from which you could pull people to be part of your business. You know, but I was speaking to a very good colleague of mine who actually is a CHRO in Nigeria, and what she said to me was, I've realised now that the geographical spread I can look at for bringing people into my business is so much bigger. And she said, but then again, so is everybody else's. So I think that's a fact. So if you're an MBA student, I think the opportunities to work for global businesses at a distance are going to be so much bigger than they have ever have been, because people understand now how to make those relationships work. So I think that's a key thing that we need to look out for. And then we have to think about, what about more mature workers? I read a very interesting article the other day by Paul Ferry that talked about those people who were nearing retirement in senior jobs in large corporate organisations, who were those who been burdened with all of the travel and the many meetings. They have discovered during the pandemic that there may be other ways for them to work, and it doesn't mean that. It might mean that if you've got a succession plan, it might be a little bit longer than you thought before, because people might stay on longer. That might not be bad, but you also have to think about those coming through the system and the opportunities for them.
We hear a lot of that phrase, and it's been, I think, in the past very much aimed at students leaving university and going into employment. But I think employability and sustainability is now kind of careers. So in this kind of fast-paced environment that we sort of find ourselves in these organisational contexts, in your view, how are we going to stay relevant, Caroline? How are we going to make sure that our skills are relevant, that we upskill and reskill, you know, sort of to make ourselves more sustainable and more appropriate?
I think the first thing and the most important thing is to be open to change. I think it's about being open to the idea that things are going to be different. So if we enter a role with qualifications X, the fact that we understand that it's going to be different is the first and the most important step. So don't expect it to be the same. And also do expect to take some personal responsibility for those things you have to do to continue to make yourself relevant. So your own self-learning, your willingness to be open to ideas, your willingness to be open to change. And I keep coming back to this point about openness to change and dealing with ambiguity. So I think those are two critical things. So I don't think there's any surefire rule for making sure you keep with the same employer, but there might be something about making sure you keep employed. And that's a lot to do with how you think yourself, what your expectation is of how long you can survive in a role and what it needs to make that change. So a lot of it is self-driven. So if you're an MBA student, one of the most critical things is understanding that I need to keep learning, to be open to change, to deal with ambiguity, and to be able to see myself in a multiplicity of roles that might not necessarily be upwards, they can also be sideways and very different. But gaining that breadth of experience, and we talk a lot about defining career success. And I think, what does it mean to you personally to have a successful career? I mean, for me personally, it means I get lots of experiences and things that I do are very interesting. I want to keep doing interesting things. For other people, it might be about what they earn or the status that they have. So what is it for you and how is that important? But being understanding that things are going to change and trying not to be afraid of change, because all of us find change threatening at some point or other. Accepting that that is going to come is going to be critically important, and it will help you manage that and help you remain employable.
Yeah, I think that's a really important one. It's basically you got to be agile as an individual, and I think when you said at the start I've had a varied career, I have. I've call it what you want, some people, but I think I've reinvented myself 3 or 4 times over now. And I think that's important. I think the fact that I'm just curious about certain things. So, I got really curious about side hustles a few years ago, and so I've set up some side hustles on my own because I got really curious about the gig economy and how that was going to work and play out. And I think, for me, it was the experimentation, the fact that I wasn't afraid to experiment, because I suspect we're going into that direction more and more, where, in the summer, I might be a strawberry picker because that's my side hustle, but, in autumn, winter, I'm a lead for diversity, inclusion and equality, but, who knows? But I can see that type of kind of sort of economy starting to grow more and more. And I think the side hustle almost goes back to what I was saying around the pandemic and the purpose and the values. I think the reason people have side hustles is because they basically want to do something they've got real interest, passion, desire, but unfortunately they've got to pay the bills somehow. So they get caught up in a role or an opportunity that isn't really quite their passion or their desire. So the side hustle is that kind of fix of how do I do this? But I suspect the fix of the side hustle is going to become more and more prevalent now. Most people are asking themselves, do I really want to do what I've been doing, or do I want to do something more meaningful in my life? Because you only get one life. So I think the future and staying relevant is it's not being wedded to the fact that you take a bit of risk, in my view, and the fact that if there's an industry of interest or a sector that's quite challenging, have a go. And like I said to you, there's a couple of roles that weren't defined lines, but I have to say I never shied away from one of those roles because I knew it was going to be quite challenging. But I thought, I'm going to go and give it a go and see what happens. And in the end, it didn't quite work out, but it was nonetheless, it was a really good learning opportunity, because for me, what I looked at there was all the things that didn't work and what would I need to do differently next time. And I think that kind of reflection, that kind of risk taking sometimes is really important, because it just kind of resets, rebalances, because you can get carried away a little bit sometimes with your own sort of career trajectory and what everyone else is saying to you when you're in a bit of a bubble. So my view is don't just stay in a bubble, just kind of make sure you're out of that bubble every now and again and kind of balance.
So the last question for me today is just really, what final piece of advice would you give our MBA audience today?
I'd say be prepared to be surprised. Right, so be prepared to be surprised. Be open for change. Okay, learn to ask for help, and be prepared to give help to others in return. So be supportive and help each other, and enjoy the ride. Time and time to say, and I'm looking at you now as what I would say a fantastic example of that. Please try, whatever happens, take the positives out of the ride and the experience, learn from those, and use it to build what you want next. So there's not a negative experience. These are just experiences. I've got a good boss, I've got a bad boss. I love my job and I hate my job. I want to work on my own. I want to work with other people. Whatever it is, use it to build that experience and build your career. And as long as you're not surprised, or you're prepared to be surprised, you're open to change, I think that gives you so many more possibilities. And it will mean that your career can be successful, defining it in your own terms.
The MBA, take the learning, ask yourself, have you really learned, or have you gone through the motion? If you've gone through the motion, you've missed it. Have you actually learned, and what are you going to do differently?
Yeah, I think that sounds brilliant. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute
sound bites that we've had today, that this has given you a much broader perspective around the questions, rather than just kind of me chatting. I think when I kind of think about my career and think about it's having allies. I think it is one of them. It's having people around you that probably sometimes know you better than you. And so when you're being asked and invited to come and do sessions like this one today, I always think it's better and more fruitful to have kind of different perspectives on it. I suppose for me, the final thoughts from myself is that the first one is here. You can see that, you know, we have a huge range of possible selves. And I think that that's one of the things I really want to get across, because I understand sometimes when we study, there's a peer group pressure. And actually there was a little bit of one, although, you know, when we were all kind of sat together on the DBA. And I think that sometimes that can be helpful, but sometimes, you know, it can't be. It just puts added pressure. And at the end of the day, we are all individuals, and you know, and we will all do things in a different way. So I suppose I'm giving you the permission to do that. You know, somebody will have an interview at somewhere else, and you haven't been called for that, but you'll be called for something else. And I think it's, if you could kind of take that kind of pressure off. I don't know whether some of you have read. It's kind of in the book of the pandemic, actually, a book called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And it's fiction. It's about a girl called Nora Seed who has absolutely had enough of life. She is absolutely at rock bottom, and she's transported to a library. And in this library, there are numerous volumes of books which actually represent different versions of her life, and she has to choose one of them. For me, it's really refreshing to think about our career like that. You know, as Bob said, we in our lives, we're all going to have jobs and careers that are going to be better than others, and that's okay. It's all about the learning that kind of goes along with it. You're sometimes not going to have a good choice for whatever reason, but it's the way that you are able to turn it around, to pick yourself up, to kind of carry on with it is kind of all part of the ride. I think the other piece as well is having a growth mindset. It sounds a little bit of a throwaway comment, but if you haven't done the Carol Dweck survey on growth mindset, I'd absolutely do that. You can find it online and really concentrate on that. I know that when I did it, I was actually just a little bit surprised, actually. I had a few blockers around a couple of the questions, which surprised me a bit. And I'm like, well, why would I care about that? But actually, I think it kind of helped me after I'd done the survey to kind of look at things in kind of a little bit of a different way. So that might be something that you might want to do. There's other learnings as well. I don't know whether some of you have read some of the studies of Ibarra around workforce identities. I actually reached her book when I left the financial sector and was going back out to study again as a student, because it was a completely different identity, and you know, worry does kind of set in. And sometimes just having a book or having something to kind of read will give you the confidence and give you other things to sort of think about. And finally, for me, before we open out to questions, for me, the future of work is lifelong learning. You've already done the step of doing an MBA, and you will shine in the workplace. You know, when I was working in the financial services, you always could tell those people that had gone the extra mile, you know, with their studies. And hey, some of you may be even brave enough to go and do the DBA, like myself as well. So before we close, I suppose the final word for me is that I just want to wish you all the very, very best of luck. With your careers, take all the opportunities, because they're all out there, they're all available to you, and just enjoy the ride. Thanks, Paul. I think we're opening up to questions now.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jane, for a fantastic session. We've got around 5 minutes for questions, so keep the questions coming in. We've had a lot come in, and obviously we won't have a chance to answer all of them, but they'll be passed on to Jane. So I think to get onto the questions, this question's appeared a couple of times. So do you think there is still a place for a CV, or is it more about a digital footprint?
I don't think we'll be going away from the CV for a while. I think once we see the baby boomers start to exit the workplace, it may be that the digital stuff starts to come. It's a really interesting question, and when it first came out and people were doing a video of me, everyone was a bit, oh, what's this? What I would say is that it really does suit some sectors rather than others. So a real life example is that my niece wanted to get a role at a marketing company, an advertising agency, and that's exactly what they asked her to do, was to do a video of her. Obviously, I mean, it was like, oh, how am I going to do it? Anyway, she did, and she got the job. I mean, it was really cool. I was quite surprised at actually the quality of it. And I actually used it for some of the sessions that I ran with graduates and other people that needed to do it. So what I'm going to say is that yes, in some sectors I think it will become more prevalent. Is the CV dead? No, not yet. Will it be in the future? Probably give it another decade or so, and I think you'll see it go.
Excellent, fantastic. So we'll go to the next question. With people being forced to work from home, do you think this has helped or hindered people's careers management?
I think that's a really interesting one. We hear a lot about people who are just starting out in work, and what do you actually pick up from the workplace? So when I kind of think about myself, I actually was a little bit concerned about working from home. So I like a community around me, and I like white noise. We are thrown into a pandemic when that isn't even possible, and so you just got to kind of got to get on with it. What I would say is that it's staying connected, and that's what I've done. So I have a mentor anyway, and I would say to anybody to have a, kind of a mentor. I think you need to be a little bit more disciplined and stay on it. And there is a balance. So when it first started, I didn't actually get out of my seat because I was a bit concerned that somebody might send me an email and I wouldn't get back in 1 minute. And then you'll then lax that slightly because you just can't keep up with that. What I think it's having permission to be able to structure the day. And where I work, what they've done really well is having senior leaders on videos to say what they are doing, and all of a sudden it gives kind of the workplace permission to be able to go for a meeting, a walk, but have a meeting and tell the person that before I want to walk, if that's okay, in our meeting, do I need to have a screen? Because if I do, obviously I'll stay in the office. But you're starting to see all these kind of different behaviours, different patterns kind of coming into the workplace. In terms of the career management itself, it will give you a lot more time to actually think about your own self-learning. What we have seen is all these courses on LinkedIn. That's what people have been doing. Obviously, they've been a bit bored, but what it does do is actually give you an opportunity to sit down and do some self-led learning. And I think all of that is really, really good stuff.
Excellent, fantastic. So we'll go to the next question. We have all proved that we can adapt overnight to the new way of working. There's a lot of resistance to change. How can you really show an employer that you are resilient and adaptable?
I think that's a really interesting one, because when you're sort of sat at home, it can be really easy to completely slip off the radar. I think what it is, and it's a little bit of a catchphrase all, but it is trying to show your authentic self. I think in any way possible. I think that those people that kind of clam up and aren't sort of really sort of saying very much, I think you've got to be really open and really honest to show that actually you are coping with it. I think to be thankful for the sorts of things that this opportunity has given you, to talk about some of the things where you're finding it a little bit more trickier. I think it's all of those things to kind of have that balance. And I think just talking about it, setting up a community around you, having coffee chats, all of those kind of sorts of things, I think will kind of really help in terms of that sort of resilience.
Amazing, excellent. I think we've got time for one last question, which is obviously around the future of work, and I think it's quite a nice one to finish with. So they're asking, what skills do you think workers will need in 2030, and how can workers start building on them now?
I still think in terms of the softer skills, it will be definitely around, as I said to you before, the mental health resilience. I think it's about that balance. I think what Caroline was saying, there are going to be more technologies in the workplace. I think we have to keep, how many people knew how to use Zoom, for example? I never even knew existed, right? And all of a sudden you've got to be sharing your screen and adding somebody in, and it's a tactical question, but it's keeping up with the internal technologies that you're using. One of the things you don't want to be seen, I don't think, is being the bumbler behind the scenes that keeps pressing the wrong thing. And it's, I think because of the pandemic, that kind of permission has gone slightly, and we've all got to kind of keep up with what's going on. So I think in-house, sort of digital stuff, the conferencing stuff, the self-led learning is only going to get bigger. I think when virtual reality gets a bit cheaper, I think it's a little bit too expensive at the moment, but I do see virtual reality really playing a part in some industries and some sectors where we can start to work from home and and really do these types of roles. So that's where kind of I can see it all going, but we just need to be one step ahead, I think, as users of that technology.
Excellent, fantastic. So thank you again, Jane, for a fantastic session. Obviously, a lot of great takeaways in today's session. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Obviously, we could go on and on about this topic. It's a really good one at the moment. So just a lot of people have been asking. This session has been recorded. So there will be a recording sent out a week from today. So you'll receive an email which will have the link to view this. We've got another webinar taking place tomorrow at 12 o'clock with John Blakely, and he'll be presenting on 9 habits for the new world of work. So if you'd like to join that session, please head over to www.associationofmbas.com to register, and obviously you can view all the rest of the webinars which we have scheduled. So all what is left to say is thank you again, Jane, for a fantastic webinar, and we look forward to seeing everyone on the next session.
My pleasure. Good luck, everyone.